Hello, Justin. Nice to
Hi,
see
Ranjit.
you. Nice of
Nice
you
to
to
see you.
join us virtually. So, Justin well, I met Justin back in Helsinki when I was studying masters in design there. He was also studying in the Tate Academy, I think, which was the arts
Yep.
academy in Helsinki.
hmm
And because of we moved in the artistic circles quite a lot, so we often encountered each other, especially through this project called Temporary. And super inspired since day one since I've met Justin. And I'm a big fan of all of his installations and his site specific works. I'm going to do a formal introduction, Justin, just in case if
hmm
that people haven't maybe seen your biography or profile.
hmm
So for those, I'll just introduce you briefly. So Justin Tyler Tate was born in Canada and grew up in the US, and he now works internationally. I think he's in Taiwan at the moment. He received his Bachelor of Fine Arts from NCCAD University and a Master of Fine Arts from Helsinki Academy of Fine Arts in Finland. And his work combines elements of sculpture, installation, media, performance, as well as social art. To continue, so Justin has been in the past decade been a professional artist. He has been exhibiting more than 100 projects in over 20 countries and 4 continents. And his work has been really prolific because it draws knowledge from many different fields, and he really marries them together in order to find solutions to contemporary problems. So he's probably a textbook transdisciplinary artist and designer, I would say. And um, in his artistic production, he uses architecture, carpentry, botany, cooking. This is something that I personally have witnessed, electronics, chemistry, new media, and more. These are all merged under a singular umbrella of artistic production. And Justin is occasionally also a curator, author. He has published several books, and he's also a social designer, as well as a frequent workshop facilitator, focusing on utilization of available materials, tools, and site specificity. So some of the participants today, attendees today, they have probably gone through your Instagram, which was shared to the community.
hmm
But for those who haven't seen anything that you have been doing prolifically, over 200 projects, maybe you can give us a glimpse of some of your activities, if you can.
Sure.
So I'll hand you
I
over
will start.
the. Yeah, you can start. Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much, and welcome to the session.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. But I suddenly can't find where to share.
I think I might have to. I think you should. Oh, okay, so can you see at the bottom? There
Oh,
some?
yeah,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
I got it.
All right.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Justin Tyler Tate. As Ranjit said, my work primarily or most recently has to do with more ecological matters using art, design, and other fields or disciplines to look for solutions with accessible uh, ways of solving problems, something like that. Anyway, uh, I'm just going to start with kind of the history of this and where I started making site specific work and how environmental work really merged into that. And that's with this work, Lemonade Stand, which was in the center of Australia, built in a day. And I really saw the landscape as an integral part of the work. Um, like the whole image is one thing, so you can't really separate the object or the performance or the landscape from each other. they're all part of the work. And I feel like this developed further on in my work, as you'll see through things like softwood basketball court, where it wasn't so much a performance on my part in this work, but an engagement with people and the landscape and this and in all these works and just my practice in general, I use a lot of repurposed materials or primarily repurposed materials. I'm notoriously bad using I just don't know how to seem to be. It's also more interesting for me to use these kind of repurposed materials or found materials. So softwood basketball court was a project that really turned the one of those events was Fake It Till You Make It, a series of workshops where every workshop is on a new topic and just looking to encourage curiosity because the topic of the workshops aren't announced beforehand. So you come to engage with your curiosity, not so much to learn a specific topic. So this engages with my practice and like the multidisciplinarity of my practice, but also my curiosity for learning new things. So in the screen, you can see some of the variety of topics. The first one was on inflatables. One the next year was on this kind of simple but really incredible circuit called a joule thief, which sucks the last bits of power out of batteries and you then uses that to produce light through LEDs. Through like a really kind of neat and interesting trick of electronics by basically making the light pulse, but so that it's not visible. And then the one in the lower corner was one on robotics, or like an introduction to robotics, making doodlebots. And then another one was on soap making. And then other ones have taught ice cream making or samosas or musical instruments and lots of other subjects. And these are, I feel like, a good co-learning environment. And curiosity is something that really infects my practice and something that I try to maybe distribute through my work, but not in a more subtle way and not make it so obvious, but just to engage with people through curiosity and play and just really accessible materials and processes. And these kind of events kind of grew bigger and bigger over time, such as through the Recycling Olympic Games, which ran for a few years always in Finland, except for the last one, which was in Latvia. But over these few years, teams of international participants would come and basically camp out in Helsinki and other places during the event and build stuff based on assignments that they would get through the competition. And each one was, each edition of Recycling Olympic Games was a little bit different. And I should say that the intention of them was really not to like realize a final result, but to get this large group of people that were interested in design and reusing materials and get them together as through a competitive environment, but also a really friendly environment where they could work together and learn from each other. And so I think that this style of facilitating workshops or events really grew out of Fake It Till You Make It, where I give a little bit of myself to it, but I also see what happens through participation, and it offers a good learning opportunity for me. So it produces this exchange of ideas and knowledge. And then I feel like Recycling Olympics kind of informed this other mode of making that I started in 2014 with Dying Free, which is an open source cardboard coffin design using laser cutters and kind of a very minimal amount of cardboard to produce a structural coffin. And the project was successful and is really interesting to research. But afterwards, and this is a project or a problem that comes up later in other things that I've seen, and I kind of wanted to talk about during this presentation, was that sometimes we engage with technology because it's interesting or novel or cool. And it's definitely a good tool for working through problems. But occasionally it would be better to go to low-tech solutions to realize the same result. And so thinking back on this project and some projects later in the presentation, I really have been thinking that there's more low-tech solutions for this. And by adopting a low-tech approach, it'll be much more accessible. Anyway, just something I wanted to mention in regards to this project. And as you can see, the website's up there, so it's not just a thing, but you can go to the website and reproduce the object yourself and give feedback if you would choose to encourage the development of the design in the future, or just produce a coffin for yourself when you eventually die. And so this thought about like doing little manuals or like sharing knowledge really developed into this reconstruction manual for a residency that was split between Kiev and Mariupol in Ukraine shortly after the initial aggression by Russia, where they were using proxies in the east of Ukraine. And after Mariupol had kind of been occupied the first time, I went down there and I researched and I looked at some of the effects of this previous occupation and developed this book based on it, thinking about what solutions could be adopted in a post-war or post-disaster state. Thinking about what are the basic human needs of people and how someone could fulfill those needs based on what they have, what they can find, and what is generally naturally available. And so through all the research that I did for the book or through the project and over the course of the year, I produced this book, which is all illustrated with the intention that you don't necessarily need to read the text or to be able to read the text, and you can still produce the results through the imagery. And also dispersed within the book are lots of photographs of the the city of Mariupol, which maybe some or all of you know is just like nothing now. It's been almost completely destroyed. But on that sad note, I'm going to move on. And this is a project that Ranjit also participated in occasionally, called Dialectics of Space, which was my master's project. And the purpose of the project was really looking for a way to kind of coalesce all these different forms of space, or like ways of using space, into one cohesive structure that was more egalitarian, and useful, and just pleasurable to be in as well. So bringing together architecture and learning, experimentation, environment, play, social relationships, and labor as well. And so during this project, which happened 2 times as 2 separate installations using the same materials, there was many different workshops and events as part of them, meals, kind of all-night events, and just interesting things that were trying to bring the people and the space together as like a cohesive unit. And that also has a website. And then about a year later, I started, and I think this comes from Dialectics of Space, but the idea of bringing these multiple different areas together through like singular works. And then I developed this work called Post-Anthropocene Architecture. And the first one was quite rudimentary, the one that's on the screen now. It didn't really have so much of a focus of like what animal specifically is trying to encourage, or how it's looking to interact with the landscape, besides of creating this kind of structure to hold up and support the landscape and provide this kind of arbitrary, artificial cave for animals to use. But it was the kind of starting place for a much deeper and more complex body of research that I've been working on continuously since then. And we'll see more examples of it. But currently I'm working on a book about it, which will be also kind of part how-to manual, and a large part thesis, as well as documentation of all the past examples that I built, and maybe some ideas for future larger scale works. And then Peer to Pickle very directly came out of Dialectics of Space. One of the events in Dialectics of Space was a pickle making workshop using waste foods. And maybe some or most of you know that waste foods, between farm and people's homes, produce like a huge amount of greenhouse gases. So Peer to Pickle was trying to look at that problem. Oh, and I should say this wasn't a project. It wasn't a singular project of mine, but it was an exhibition that I curated in New York. So there's 4 artists taking part in the exhibition, including myself. One Scottish, one Polish, and one Taiwanese. And so each of these artists was looking at food waste in their own ways. And then through the project's website, I was trying to quantify how food waste could be like transformed to create alternative economies, such as through pickling or food service, whatever. And this exhibition also had workshops and some meal events that were part of my work. And then the next month, I was invited to do a class in the very far north of Canada, in the Arctic. And so the class that I thought of and I was really excited about brings together some themes that you've seen in previous parts of the presentation, being play and reused materials and sports or games and competition. So the Garbage 500 was a workshop for building toboggans or sleds, and then a race at the very end of it to see who was not just the fastest, but the most stylish or the best design, etc. Everyone got really into it and had a great time, of course. But the thing that I thought about a lot when like planning the project is how these objects create like a connection between yourself or the body, the environment, and this like active performance, as well as this active play. And so all these things come together in this like singular object. And this connection between environment and body comes up later in my work as well, in maybe more direct ways. And then I think right after the Garbage 500, I went to Latvia to do Cube Farm, which is a modular agriculture design using 100% recycled materials. I think except for the stain and a bit of silicone. The stain was actually left over. So on the right side of the screen, you see these 3 cubes that are stacked on top of each other, all using a pallet base, and then have a hydroponic system which connects to the hydroponic systems that are below, or if there was more, to the left and right sides. The idea being that you could stack these things infinitely and produce a farm that way, using these easily replicated designs and also very sturdy designs. So with this project, like Dying Free, all the instructions for how to do it, how to replicate it, everything about the project is all available on the project's website. And so within these projects, the design, the website, and the actual objects themselves they're not separate. They're all the work together at the same time. And also like how these things live or get reproduced in other people's hands. And I think this kind of democratized approach to design and building is interesting, partially in the way it can change over time and evolve through other people's ideas, but also a way as decentralizing production. Scaffold was the second post-Anthropocene architecture that I produced, and I guess very similar in a way to Cube Farm, in that it's this vertical farming structure, but the purpose of it is so incredibly different, in that all the plants growing on it are what most people consider to be weeds. So it's the structure that protects and like gives a home to all these weeds. And by lifting them up off the ground, enables their seed production to be distributed farther than they normally would. And this is also I shouldn't say that they're weeds because in my mind they're not weeds. They're all very useful things like dandelions or nettles, mugwort, and so on. These like things, these leafy greens that are nutritious and edible, and maybe sometimes will sting you, but most of the time probably they won't. But they're overlooked, and the plants are overlooked and the materials overlooked, and they come together in this structure. And I don't, for me, that's like using these really overlooked materials and objects are kind of alchemy, like turning something that's useless into gold, essentially. Um, yeah. And then, so this was during the pandemic. And because of the pandemic, I had a few projects that were canceled in Korea and Canada and US. But I picked up this project in this very south of Taiwan, um, a small town, one of these kind of large landmark sculptures that would be visible, kind of like a tool for placemaking. And so I went down to visit the town and designed these structures based on what materials they had. And what they had was a lot of driftwood and a lot of plastic. Um, so I tried to design these based on that and like really trying to fill up the maximum amount of space, but also to use the maximum amount of the found materials. So other than these found materials, the only things that went into the structures were really some screws. Everything else is found, and all of these structures are 5 meters tall. Some of them are wider than that. I think the one on the lower left hand side is 6 meters. Anyway, I don't think they're my most interesting work, but I think they're useful as a tool and like as a way of thinking about materiality and how we can reuse things um, to to create our work in ways that are ethical and um, help produce more resilient ecosystems by either removing waste from them or like other forms of encouraging resiliency. Lush House was immediately after the Southern Wilds, and it was, or as the title kind of implies, it's a structure built for mushrooms to grow on. So the whole structure is lined with hardwood logs that were either dead trees or just branches and stuff that I found in the forest nearby. And all the larger structural supports were recovered from a former factory that was being renovated. So in this work, this post-Anthropocene architecture, I was thinking of, or I had been thinking about developing these more like urban replicas, but for specific species and how those specific species can like have a greater influence on their environment as a whole. So this one is for mushrooms, and as far as I know, it's still standing. Um, as far as I know, they're all still standing actually. Um, and so this one, as the mushrooms grow, and the nearby fauna can take advantage of that and consume them. The variety of mushroom species that grow on the structure, but also it provides a kind of congregation space for humans if they're in that field, or if they choose to go out to the structure. And Aviale kind of follows the same format of building up and multiplying and using structure as a way to encourage animals. So in this one, unfortunately, I had to use concrete for the base because the community requested it. I would prefer not to use concrete, but it was a compromise that I made for the work. And the wetlands behind the work are an important site for migratory birds as they pass by in the winter, I believe. And so I built the structure as a site for birds to congregate and roost and so on. And like as they land, as they shit on the structure, then also it encourages this garden at the base of the structure to grow and change and develop over time. And then later, I think it was the same year. Yeah. Later in the same year, just after finishing Aviale, I was supposed to go to Finland, but there were some problems because the pandemic was still going on. And to give this workshop during this multimedia event called Pixelake, this festival. But I didn't get to go. So I made a kind of virtual version of the workshop, or an auditory workshop, which teaches people, hopefully, how to repurpose their air conditioner to make these spirulina growing algae farms. So using the waste from the air conditioner to create oxygen and absorb carbon dioxide through the production of this spirulina farm or algae bioreactor. And the whole audio workshop is still available on the project's website. And then I started thinking about this idea of post-Anthropocene architecture a little bit more seriously, or a little bit more academically, I should say, around 2021, 2022. And so I developed this project and did it in Norway, where I didn't have plans for any of these structures, but saw it as like a learning opportunity. And just every day or every few days, I would go out into the forest with a couple of hand tools, maybe a chainsaw, safety gear, and I would just find a spot that had a lot of materials that were already fallen or standing dead or other things, and try to work with the like super site specific resources of that area and build something that can grow over time and can have a greater influence on its surrounding area while also being functional to the endemic species that are there. So in the top left corner, you see this kind of wall structure. It's a V, kind of like a V-shaped wall. And the idea was that it catches all this debris from the hill. And as it collects, it builds up and it composts over time and creates this really super rich, fertile, localized area that can be used. In the one on the top right, you see this kind of pyramidal or dome structure built out of logs from a fallen dead tree. And I saw that as a structure that animals could hide in, play in, stuff like this. And in the lower left-hand side, there's this kind of woven nest with debris kind of similar in the way I was imagining it would function over time as the top left hand image or structure. And then on the bottom right hand side is a structure that was designed to fall over time, kind of like a trap. So there's one vertical log that's supporting it that's supposed to decay over time. And then as it does, it drops the whole structure to become this, to leave this accumulation of debris and organic material onto that spot. And the individual like production through this work wasn't so important as much as the time it gave to me to like really reanalyze the thesis or the core of the work and imagine how it could relate to the environment in different ways and how it could use materials in different ways. Track and Trail is a project that got kind of postponed during. It was one of the ones that was postponed during the pandemic, and it happened in the United States in the West, where I got free access to their local dump to get whatever materials I could find, which was really amazing. And the project I had proposed to them was to build this kind of playground that produced power. So all the power that you see, all the lights on the structure are using some thrown away devices that have been repurposed to create electricity generation devices that are activated through play, through activity. Yeah. And then this is another one of those projects where I used technology and it was a good learning experience for what can be done better with low-tech means. So in Archipelago, the purpose of the work is to enable recycling at home. So with it, you can take plastic bottles and turn them into 3D printing filament, and then print these little nodes or connectors to connect bottles to create architectural structures like Legos or Tinker Toys, but on a much larger scale. So using the bottles themselves as both structure and as raw material. And the project is pretty successful as it is. I designed this filament extruder for it and produced all these connectors. But through the time and like the research and development, trial and error process, I really feel like I could do it analog in a much more efficient way. And so that's kind of, if I continue with the project or make a version 2, I think I'd like to see it through in a much more analog and low-tech way. And by doing so, make it much more accessible because most people don't have 3D printers or access to 3D printers. And then I think this is the last project that I'm going to talk about is Apothecary, which I did last summer in the US. And what it is similar to dialectics of space. It's this like architectural structure or space where events and objects come together, thinking about environment. But this is also really, the project engages with health a lot, maybe more than most of my past works. So using wild forage plants and really getting to know the local environment, and then using those forage plants to create medicinal kind of products or experiential non-traditional art objects, as I would like to call them, things like bath bombs, soaps, alcohol, and other things. And through this project, there was workshops also on soap making and bath bombs, teas, stuff like this, as well as a publication and a series of video tutorials. And the publication itself acts as kind of an archive for the whole project, showing how to do all the things through the project, as well as documentation of the installation itself, and like an introduction to many of the plants that were used through the project. And just some things that maybe I think about or that I thought would be useful for this talk were questions that we should all be asking ourselves when we're trying to create resilient art and design projects. And the top one is one that's come up a lot for me is how is the technology used to produce our work necessary for the function or concept of the work, or is it superfluous and primarily intended for like a cooler wow factor? Is it just like interesting to work with? And I think this question is not so much, or it's important to go through the process of using the technology, but then once you do, it's also important to like rethink how it can be done better, if it can be done better without that technology. And that comes to the second question. And then, do the materials used align with ethical concern of the work in the present moment, or are they antithetical to the work? So in the past, I've seen like some works advocating for or like against the climate crisis, but then they require the person to like travel a lot for like very short trips. And that just seems really antithetical to me. Or are you producing a work of reducing plastic pollution, but creating a bunch of plastic pollution? I think these things are problematic and important concerns when producing work. And then, are the materials or processes used in the creation of the work carbon positive or negative? So in my work, I'm trying to use all, or primarily at least, but generally all repurposed or found materials, even in the largest structures that I've made. So in all the, and primarily wood. So in those cases, it's all carbon negative because it's storing the carbon and they're all locally found. They don't require a lot of transportation. And it's always a secondary life for the materials. So there was no real carbon created in them going into my work. And then we should think about how different materials and processes could produce a work that is carbon negative if you are thinking about ones that are carbon positive. And then even if we're producing resilient works, are the materials and processes used in their production produced ethically and without exploitation of labor or environment? By this, I mean, like maybe we're using something that has a chip or that requires the exploitation of someone far away. Usually it happens in the global south. Anyway, I don't feel like this one is so applicable to my work because I do always use recycled or repurposed materials. But I can imagine how sometimes it's important to use something, and we should just always be really conscious of what we're using and its own individual history of that component of the work. And then maybe this is a bit uncommon for a presentation on someone's work, but I just thought I'd give some suggested reading, some things that I've read recently that I found really helpful for like formulating ideas in regard to these topics. I guess that's it. Ranjit?
Hello, Justin. Thank you so much.
Hi.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I really love the way you rounded up the talk with the discussion with the last conclusion or takeaways, for some of the participants today, because the interesting thing is with Terra Carta Design Lab, there has been a couple more talks before, and the whole thing with the Terra Carta chapter, which you might have read about through the link that I sent you, this is like they're trying to put sustainability at the heart of the private sector. So there is like this, there's a strong assumption that business as usual will have its own inertia, and it has its own way of behaving in the world. So how do you put now sustainability and the planet's consciousness at the heart of something that hasn't been working? And it's a bit like the annoying doorbell you heard all this while. Somebody, sorry about that. I wasn't able to change that setting. I'll make sure that gets changed in the future. But it's like somebody thought it was a good idea, the doorbell. But now when the actual situation happens with a Zoom call, you realize, oh, it wasn't such a good idea after all. So now when you talk about innovation, sustainability innovation in the private sector, we have a lot of these doorbells and stuff like somebody designed at some point, and we are living with it. And now we can't change things without radically rethinking things. So I think your talk was an example of radical rethinking, radical redoing, which is why artistic research and radical design research, these are the sort of tools that help us to fundamentally change the paradigm of many things that we are living with, rather than do like sort of like small changes, even though the small changes can have big cumulative effects, saving 2% of energy here, and then you multiply it by 1 million households and you might have like this butterfly effect of sorts. But your talk and your examples gave, this whole idea of changing the way things are from a very fundamental point of view. So I really appreciate it. And before we take some questions, which I'm sure some people have from the audience, I had some questions like I've been writing down from my side. If we could have like a small discussion, and then we can move on.
Sure.
Yeah.
I didn't realize I went so late.
No, it's okay. I mean, in India, it's not a problem with the time so far.
Okay.
We have. We don't have a limit at the moment, so as you just tell me when you want to drop out.
Okay.
But I was wondering, like, first of all, with all the diversity of your works, there was a few examples I have seen from Instagram and your website, which you haven't put today, which is fine. But there were some pretty cool examples that I was thinking of. Like there was this the built example of this example was the example of the bunker or the house of cards, I think, which you had made around this space where there was construction going on, and then you repurposed the waste material from the construction site and you made like a sort of like a generative construction or site specific installation that grew over time. So these kind of projects, they're interesting in the sense that how do you, when you approach your projects, do you are you spontaneous, or do you sort of like spend a few days and then you research the site and then see what you can come up with. In some instances, you might need a certain tools, like there's one of your works which needs like thousands of screws, which you have repurposed. So you found the screws before, and then you decided what you want to do with it. So is there like a process that you have identified when you have done like so many projects?
I think the process changes based on the needs of the project and the place. So the one that you're talking about, House of Cards, that was actually the project I went there to do over this month-long residency in Michigan. But once I got there, I realized, oh, there's all these materials, and I've been thinking about doing this other project, Mush House, for a while, and so I worked on that in the day, and then at night I would go into the factory where all the materials came from, and I would build these installations up over a period of 4 hours and dismantle them, or build them up, document them, dismantle them, and like try to put everything back exactly where I found it. So it became like this performative action in itself, but also for the laborers who are working there that maybe like notice some things are slightly out of place or even more organized than when they left them. And to like experiment with installation on its own without like these constraints of like the other projects or the more ecological side of my work, to really just work with the medium as itself through these temporary constructions.
Right. Yeah. Thanks. And also, I was curious about the dialectics of space, which is a very interesting concept. So you use the dialectics of space in creating, the certain atmosphere where things change all the time with people coming in with the activities, but they are sort of also having categories. Like you have this category of social, labor, architecture, pedagogy, experimentation, environment. So this dialectics of space, is it coming from some author's work from before? Is it like your concept?
The title itself is my own concept, but it's working on some or like a variety of different authors or philosophers ideas. Henry Lefebvre is the kind of main one. He wrote The Politics of Space. And then there was an architect, a Dutch architect, Johan Huizinga, who created these architectural or play spaces and developed this idea of homo ludens, or the playing man, and talked about how we like learn through play. And so the project was really trying to bring all these things together to create like a cohesive structure and way of formatting the space that we live, work, and like socialize in.
Wow, thanks. And also one question that I've been super curious about was you have hashtagged some of your works, site-specific works, especially to do with social housing or built environments, with the hashtag of art and crafts movement. So do you think the art and crafts movement is like something that it's part of your design philosophy or art philosophy? Because it was also influential for the Bauhaus when they were discarding excessive ornamentation that wasn't required, or trying to go against this sort of like mechanization through industrial tools. So do you try to sort of bring back some kind of human quality when you talk about like the art and craft movement as a reference?
I think like for the work that you're talking about, Belvedere, I was thinking about that a lot, like while I was building it, as I was building these two tiny side-by-side tiny houses over the course of a month using mostly pallets, and trying to build them like really beautiful. And they're certainly not ornamented, but you see all the parts of it. And I think being able to see the structure of things or the history of things as its own kind of ornamentation, um, especially when you're working with repurposed materials or um, found materials and you're trying to build something new with them, you really have to take a lot of care into how you treat them and like pulling out every nail and choosing them, selecting them to give them this new history afterwards.
Got it. And now I had a question more about like directly about the sustainability and the market forces. So, in order to fix the planet, now we talk about SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and now you've heard of the new European Bauhaus, which is also called as the NEB, which is sort of like quote unquote a cultural movement that combines art, technology, and design, which you do as well. And it democratizes the transition within our communities to make a future in tune with climate goals, giving people the chance of participation and community ownership in the green transition. So wouldn't you be sort of like a torchbearer for new European Bauhaus, or how do you see yourself in that NEB ecosystem or movement?
I don't know. I've never associated myself with the movement, so I can't say like specifically. I think in principle it's interesting, and scaling up is maybe necessary, but then scaling up also presents its own problems for the environment, like such as resource extraction, and concerns for the ethics of labor and trying not to exploit either people or environment. And I think any true eco-technology has to be truly ethical and both how it treats labor and environment.
Got it. But if one has to compete, for example, with a massive industry, like for example, it would be fossil fuel, if you have to compete with that for a healthier choice or for building more energy efficient building, if you want to compete with concrete and steel, and then you have a new material and you just want to scale up as soon as possible to ensure that. So it all has, like for example, this new European Bauhaus has identified, one material called earthen walls, which was like a prize winning in the 2021 built environment category, I think. And you can see that if that material is used, of course, there's a danger of overexploitation and there is a danger of like the labor exploitation. But, isn't there like a tension between waiting to solve every single problem that could arise from upscaling up an innovative solution? For example, the cube box, was that the correct term for the cube box?
Farm.
Cube farm. Sorry, I already made it into a product. Sorry. So cube farm, if that becomes scaled up, if that becomes like a market sort of scaled up product, it will sort of mitigate some of the concrete, steel, and this more like lifeless structures and more energy consuming structures, which are also not going to be balanced with nature, like the cube farm is. So if somebody would invest in cube farm and want to scale it up, like would you sort of have to question the scaling up of things, or would you keep it like low scale and what would be the reasons for that?
That's kind of why I approach things from a decentralized or open source approach, by like creating these kind of inventions and designs and then publishing them and trying to make them as accessible as possible for as many people as possible, so that it creates a system where materials and labor is not being exploited for profit, And I think what you're talking about, such as materials like concrete or steel or fossil fuels, I think we need to approach these things really from a governmental regulation perspective, like we did with aerosol or cigarettes, um, to de-incentivize the use of those products from a top-down approach rather than trying to like compete them for profit because they've already got such an incredible head start. And like creating some greenwashed product isn't necessarily going to be competitive in that market.
That's a very cool point. I didn't think of it that way, but it's true that governments, the problem they say is that you have a highly messy problem, which is sustainability and the health of the planet and climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a highly fragmented organization called the government, which is the least equipped or the least trained to handle any sort of like wicked or complex problems to begin with. So it's a really good case for enhancing the regulation design of what the government does without all the lobbying and things like that. There hasn't been maybe enough attention gone into how do we design for government as much as design for the industry as such. That's a very cool point. Yeah. And also that deals with the tension between what we call as the commons resource, which is the environment, and then the capital. So there is like, given the market forces, there is this ongoing tension. And do you think that there is like, let's say for any of the Terra Carta design participants, if they have an innovative product, let's say if it's a product that does community composting very efficiently, and then if it needs to be, if it needs to be a product, like you actually have to buy, let's say a compost that's driven by renewable energy, and then it, sorry, I'll just end with this person. So it has, like, if it comes in the form of a product and that's the only way for that community composting to actually take off, it's somewhere between sort of like, it's somewhere between the government buying a private market technology and trying to do like a technical fix, and at the decentralized level trying to conduct waste management more efficiently so that it doesn't go into the landfill. So there's this layer in the middle, and there's probably some products in that layer in the middle that they can sort of aim for. So do you think that those kind of products that are like, in the middle ground between what we call as the commons and what we call as likely completely monopolistic market can be an interesting playground to sort of like design products for?
For me, I think I'm not sure that like seems like a completely like privatized market if your sole buyer is the government. I mean, it kind of is, but I think that's better than trying to advertise to like a million people and encourage them to buy this thing, and then the whole profit motive drives its quality down and stuff like this. So I think there's certainly a lot of potential for designing these things that are like paid for by government, I guess.
Got it. This is more like a basic question referring to the sheer diversity and scale of your work. I mean, you have put in, you have sort of been throwing out a lot of work. In one of your internships, you managed to do, I think, around 14 or 15 installations, which is quite a lot, including a micro installation. So how do you sort of like, is there any, like most of the, I think Terra Carta participants are in the stage of prototyping. They have to work with tools, they work with, so what's your superpower when you manage to sort of like do these magical things with your site and installations? You sort of, you can, you seem to be able to transform any environment into something interesting. So is it the tools that are like the main thing that you sort of like go to transform your surroundings, or is it just ability to sort of improvise? I mean, that's a very subjective question, I know, but like, if there is any insights you can give on how.
I think for me, it's at one point like a process of developing your own curiosity, and from there, like wanting to learn a lot of different tools and materials, and through that, I like acquiring that really large metaphorical toolbox. You can then adapt to a variety of situations, and you can bring like bits and pieces from different fields and combine them in like new and interesting ways that someone that's only used to one tool or like a couple of different tools and processes that they won't see.
Right. Thanks, Justin. So I'm going to take some questions from the participants.
Mm-hmm.
If I can see any raised hands or something. There is one raised hand. I'm going to unmute.
Sure. Hi. Thank you for sharing your projects. Very interesting stuff. I had a couple of questions. One being, do you often revisit the structures that you've constructed? Like, do you find the time to sort of go and see how it's sort of integrated into the ecosystem that you built it into?
Sometimes, and other times when I don't have time to specifically go back, I'll request that the organizations that I've worked with take photos and send them to me so that I can see how they're changing, or just even ask for updates to find out how these things are doing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because especially you've worked with a lot of land, right? But when I think about a post-Anthropocene, it's a lot of things to do with water, because like say climate change is a real thing and all that, and oceans are like, some say oceans are the new future, and like they're looking at speculations with respect to underwater over like solar panels, say, on top of them and things like that. So it's very interesting to see that most of your work is with found objects on land itself. So I found that to be very interesting as well. And my other question was just, do you find it difficult to stop thinking and doing? I mean, like, because you're like exploring things all the time, and whether it's like a new
why
technology.
Would I want to stop thinking and doing?
No. Like for a project, for example, like my question is, how do you stop? Like, how do you know it's done?
I guess it's just a feeling. Like sometimes you know it's done, sometimes you can't go any further, or sometimes you just need to take a break. Like with Dying for Your Archipelago, they needed like some time to stop that part of the project and then reflect on them, to maybe come back later, or to think about how they can be done better or evolve in the future.
And last question, do you see your work as a form of activism of sorts?
Yeah, I think especially in the past couple of years, it's gone more in that direction, as kind of activism through like building and engaging people on a very personal level.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pranit. Those were good questions. Can take some more if there is anyone else. I'm only seeing 8 participants. I wonder why. There was a lot of doorbells. Looks like nobody else has questions. That's really strange. Well, I do have questions.
You have a lot of questions.
I have a lot of questions. I think you know. So the question I do have is: you have had like this super diverse experience in, I think, 20 plus countries, 4 continents, exposure to different cultures, different people. Now the question is: now some problems like waste management and the waste culture, material culture, mismanagement of material culture, the lack of energy efficiency. These are universal problems across cultures, across locations, which is why we have a climate problem. In your opinion, when you see so many patterns as an artist, what are some of the universally addressable ways of solving some of these problems that we are not looking into enough? Like governments seem to sort of miss the forest for the trees, or the private sector doesn't sort of get it. Let's take waste management, for example, that we all know that we should avoid waste from leaving the neighborhood, and it should never end up in the landfill. We should sort of be able to handle it way before. So is there any examples off the top of your hat? Because you're also working with recycling, so you actually are that person who is exposed to the waste materials all the time, or you go looking for it. Yeah,
I think probably the biggest problem is plastics, and just not making, because like everything else is quite recyclable. Glass is infinitely recyclable. Tin is also, or like steel is very recyclable. Paper is biodegradable. But when it comes to plastic, it's not. It's this myth that we've been fed. And it gets into our bodies, it gets into our food. And it's just, there was a study published, I think last month, about how it's a myth, and it's always been known by the industry to be a myth. And even that the petroleum industry is like shifting their focus towards more and more plastics. So I think a big problem is that things are packaged in this material, and if that was cut out from the system altogether, it would make waste management much more easy for the system, for individuals. Like it would simplify the whole process just by removing this one material from our streams.
I agree completely. That also is an irony, because a lot of countries that have the resources to control that, they actually haven't banned single-use plastic, for example. So that's brilliant. And then, no plastic, and it means no chips, no potato chips, no, none of these sort of like no toothbrushes. I mean, so you see, like it gets it gets fragmented into these micro parts, and these micro parts are obviously even difficult to trace once they are in the waste. So they start sort of becoming more and more micro and micro, further fragmenting, and it's really a disaster. So I do hope myself also that most of the entries to the Terra Carta would sort of like treat it as a central, one of the biggest problems we have right now in how to overcome that, so that it's not designing on the other side of the equation, but sort of like trying to control it before it gets released anywhere. Yeah. And going to energy efficiency, do you have any, what's your experience with all the projects and countries you have visited, like when it comes to energy? Do we see a more utopian sort of optimistic trend where we have more transition towards electric batteries and, renewables than it used to be before?
I mean, there is, but there's also just more use of electricity in general, like year by year. I was reading about how AI just uses so much electricity recently. And with that becoming a big thing, it's got this whole growing energy footprint. And like, I think it was for the last COP, they were originally thinking about introducing legislation to like reduce to phase out fossil fuel use but then it would introduce some like obscure language where it basically like made it meaningless. I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact wording right now, but I'm not so hopeful, really.
Yeah, let's say that 2023-24 wasn't the most hopeful transition, considering a lot of energy was spent in wars and things like that. But, and also the idea of energy being, and also waste having a political dimension to it makes things not so easy to solve as such. So I'm going to wait for any other questions from our wonderful audience, who seem to be disappearing by the minute. We got 6 left. None so far. I suppose we are free to like talk about whatever at this stage. Sure. Overall, when you look at sort of initiatives like these, I mean, like I was saying, like, you know, there was a couple of people who had talks before you, like in December, and one of them was a company called Coco Networks. They are doing like these bioethanol stoves in Africa. So what they do is they have these sort of like bioethanol fuel dispensing units, and they also design their own stoves, and sort of that helps the African households to replace charcoal dependency and other harmful and toxic ways of cooking with more sort of environmentally friendly ways of cooking. So that's an example of using the private market to sort of like give people products which they probably couldn't live without, because you already have a kitchen, you already have the stove, and, you know, it's designed into your living environment now. That is a question of replacing a sort of like a fireplace with a better stove or something like that. So in those kind of contexts, you can see that, you know, then when 1 million or billion people or 500,000 people use it, then probably there's less people dying from toxicity, and like, you know, there's some kind of an impact in some direction. And if that's sort of like, that's one way to look at it. But from your gut feeling, like, you know, what would be the best of both worlds kind of thing, like, you know, where you already also have the private players and the consumer demand, and also the need to radically rethink how we live and how we restructure things from a very fundamental point of view, which you do in your works. Is there something that comes from the top of your head, like for about this initiative of Terra Carta, for example?
I think we need to really be looking at like how to holistically change culture beyond just like individual things, but try to affect people's consumption and buying and habits. So I think one maybe good example is like right to repair and making things hackable or just not so disposable. And this comes back to like getting rid of plastics in general, using materials that are recyclable and have a long lifespan. I think that would be really important from both like a product standpoint, because we all need some things, of course. Even I can't make everything as much as I'd like to try. But yeah, better materials, better products that have a long lifespan. Like the first light bulb lasted forever. It's still burning to this day, but no one makes a profit off that. And it's that profit incentive that makes products cheaper and more disposable over time. And then we end up with things like fast fashion, which exploit both labor and natural resources. for things that just get worn once or twice and then thrown away.
That's an interesting point, actually, because what you call as the circular economy, if the circular economy sort of becomes more efficient, or if the circle starts spinning faster, then the sort of like then the products that you make is sort of also going to spill over faster, and it just increases consumption and everything at a fast rate. So I had I had one question. The last question was actually related to this answer, which was about behavior change, that ultimately changing people's understanding, knowledge, consciousness, and that leads to behavior change, and taking personal responsibility is probably the best design you can sort of introduce in the supply chain, where the consumers are really conscious of what they're buying and why they're buying, and how their individual choices end up sort of having consequences. And I was wondering if some of your works also, for me, felt that you wanted the people to walk away with a little bit of mind shift or like mindset change when they experience your installation. But that's something I took away. I don't know if you sort of designed that into your intention.
I want people to like be a little bit more curious after encountering my works, and curious about the landscape, about their environment, about their own abilities in terms of like physically doing things or learning new skills. I think this comes out in kind of all my works on like a really low key level. It's kind of there, but it's not in your face, or I try not to make it in your face. But I feel like it's also part of that's really missing from at least Western society. You know, people just want to buy something and then fix all their problems, but it doesn't really fix anything. And it also comes back to some experience that I've had where I worked at a summer camp while I was doing my bachelor's. And the summer camp was for socially disabled kids. And I worked in the wood shop teaching people how to build like simple little wooden things. And one of the kids had Tourette's. Most of the kids were autistic or ADHD, but one of the kids had really serious Tourette's. And but when he was in the wood shop, when he was working with the tools, working with his hands and building things, his Tourette's would just disappear. And it was really amazing to see like all this stress that like manifests as his Tourette's to just melt away because he's focused on the task and working with tools and materials. And so I think that's really carried through a lot of my work. And first of all, because it's really feels really great for me while working, and I really enjoy the process, but I try to give that to other people through various ways, through how-to manuals, through workshops, through events, and just even by seeing my larger installations, hopefully they know that like one person built this in a few days, and it's so big, and hopefully it changes their mindset a little bit.
Wow, that's really cool. The aspect of material, like being engaged with natural materials itself being therapeutic in a way, that's really cool. Okay, I don't want to take all of your time, Justin, for today. So if there's no more questions, we can sort of conclude the talk. It was really amazing to have you over, and very, very happy that we were able to talk. There's a heart sign somebody has put up there.
Oh, wonderful.
And I
thanks
suppose,
for the invitation.
It makes, I guess it makes, the post-Anthropocene look like your works make it seem like the post-Anthropocene situation is here, which is kind of interesting.
I hope so.
Yeah. So
if we can
you might be a
imagine
bit
it, we
ahead
can
of
make it
time.
happen.
Right.
Maybe. That's fine. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.